teachers are the problem, right? So, or at least part of the problem.
And we are live with Jay Wamsted. How do you say your last name, Jay?
Wamsted. You said it.
Wamsted. I said it right.
Yeah.
An educator, math teacher, long-time educator, writer, also musician. I did not know this when I was preparing for this show. So we have a lot to talk about beyond today and just about education. Jay teaches at Benjamin Mays High School in Southwest Atlanta, but is switching schools to another school, but is there now and has been there for 14 or 15 years. He writes in various articles or various publications, including Education Post, which is near and dear to my heart, but also has been in Sojourners, which is also a publication that I'm a longtime subscriber to, and notably the Harvard Educational Review. I mean, wow.
I know.
Wow, I'm in the morning of greatness here, in the morning with greatness here. So that's awesome. Welcome, Jay. I appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, good morning, Chris. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks.
Well, listen, this is, I want to give people an appropriate setup for why we are talking today. And I think the best way to do it is to share the thing that started us having a conversation today. So there was this article in the New York Times that spoke with, I think, 8 teachers. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think about 8 teachers about the challenges that kids face that are particular to where they live. A big overarching idea of the article was that your zip code determines quite a bit about how well you do in life and in schools. And the teachers were discussing their various vantage points about what we need to do to make sure that we're giving enough thought and analysis to the trauma and to the needs that kids bring into schools that go unmet generally outside of schools and in society. That you can see here that the title of it was "Without Fixing Inequality, the Schools Are Always Going to Struggle," which gave me an immediate allergic reaction. The subtitle here is "Our City's Teachers on How Children's Neighborhoods at Birth Shape Their Lives." Again, it antagonized one of my antennas. And then in here, there was this quote from Jay, who I wasn't connecting Jay to being the Jay that we know through EdPost. I just went with the quote for it. And actually, to tell the truth, I didn't pay attention to Jay's name. I just read the article and was being hit by some of these lines on the side. But this first one, zip code may not be destiny, but it operates with something like gravity. That was a quote that really hit me from this article. This is a good time to talk about this because there's a balance between understanding, being truthful and being real about the challenges our kids face, and also being real about the fact that if you focus on that as a primary educational concern and your interventions stem from that, you can fall into what I call educational essentialism or determinism, or be very reductive, which is the part that I responded to. The sense that where you're born determines who you're going to be. The sense that your zip code actually is a prison. The idea that nothing can break that mold or beat the odds. Without contextualizing those ideas, it could actually have the opposite. It sounds like equity, an equity focus, but it can have the opposite effect without contextualizing it the right way.
Yeah.
So Jay, that's where I want to start, is because I'll just say, honestly and truthfully, this wasn't to come out against your portion of this article. It was in total. Sure. If I put the whole article in the blender and came out the other end, it felt like educational essentialism in the main from educators, which is the part that I think is really dangerous for us. So that's where I want to start. What do you think with my setup there?
No, it's perfect. And so first off, I'll say that that's my quote that they used as the title. If you want to scroll back up, the "Without fixing income inequality, schools are always going to struggle." Is that it?
Yep, there it is.
Yeah. And so that I said that. And I talked to the reporter. It was kind of a strange process where they put out an open call for teachers who teach in cities to write in and get a chance to get interviewed. And so I submitted some written responses to some questions. And then I talked to the reporter for about 40 minutes about a whole bunch of stuff. And this was one of the things we talked about. And I did say that quote. And in the midst of a long conversation about racism is a huge part in Atlanta education. And I'd love to talk more about that. I talked a lot about just the struggles with high schools, the middle schools, the bureaucracy, all kinds of stuff. But she did pull that out. And I see why she did it, because it resonated with things she pulled out from the other teachers. And that it is kind of a flat rendering the New York Times gave, I think, to the notion that I saw someone on Twitter, they reshared the article with this kind of snarky comment that said, "Oh, sure, all we have to do now is fix the problem that's plagued us since the beginning of time. Thanks," And it was it's a flattening, and it does trend towards essentialism, where a teacher can walk into a situation and, based on the zip code, just believe they know what's going on with that student and that classroom, and it leads to a lot of failed classrooms. I would like to take this opportunity to direct you towards a little bit of an extrapolation I wrote for y'all at Education Post. And if you just search my name, Education Post, you find it. If you just search Education Post gravity, and we did use that line that zip code isn't destiny, but it does operate with something like gravity. And I do like that line. I wrote it. But
is that why you like it?
Well, I liked it when I wrote it, because the New York Times was asking us to say that whether zip code was destiny or not. And of course, zip code isn't destiny. Like, zip code where you're born doesn't determine where you end up in life. And we all know that. But the aggregate of the data is that zip code is gravity. Kids born into rich zip codes tend to grow up rich, and kids grown into poorer zip codes tend to not grow up rich. And that is a gravity. Those zip codes exert a gravity on, that's the piece. I think the piece has a little more nuance, I hope it does, than the New York Times. So I would encourage anybody who's already mad at me to check the piece out first and then be mad.
You know what I want to say about this, though, is let's stick with this. Zip code may not be destiny, but it is hard to fight as gravity. Actually, I'm not understanding the difference between those two. Like, gravity is a law. Gravity will keep you on the ground no matter what you want to do. You can't fight. So it might as well be destiny, because your destiny is to stay with 2 feet on the ground, because gravity is going to make that happen.
Gravity is a law, but we beat gravity all the time. I mean, we fly. We create airplanes and hang gliders and kites, and we get off the ground all the time. So that's kind of what I like about it, is that gravity will push you down, and the inertia is towards staying in one spot. But we have skills and art and technology that can get us, we can break the pull of gravity.
So what's the equivalent then of an airplane? Because 99% of our lifetime, our feet are going to be on the ground. If we beat gravity, it's going to be for less than 1% of our life. So what's the educational equivalent of beating gravity? For a poor black kid born into a zip code that is predominantly black and brown and poor, a zip code like that, what's the educational equivalent of beating gravity? What's the airplane?
Well, I think there's a small scale answer to that question. And me, I'm a classroom teacher. I've been a classroom teacher for 14 years. God willing, I will be a classroom teacher for another 14 years or longer. And so I think the initial answer to that question is the teacher. The classroom teacher is the first step to beating gravity. But that's not an airplane. That lifts up a single child, a one class of children.
That feels like a pilot, maybe a pilot or a flight attendant.
Yeah, or maybe the little single prop plane that the Wright brothers flew. Like the teacher can get some kids off the ground.
Yeah. It's like a crop duster.
And I guess that's where, how the New York Times reporter, and I got to talking about this, was just this notion of society is stacked against teachers. The income inequality is stacked against teachers. The way we fund schools is stacked against teachers. The way certain children go to, and the piece you're scrolling through right now has some data about my school district in Southwest Atlanta where I teach, and then a school district, my zip code, I'm sorry, where I teach in Southwest Atlanta, and the same school district 2 zip codes over, and has some demographic data, some income data, and it's staggering. And nobody would be surprised at this. Anybody that lives in a city knows that there are poor parts of town and rich parts of town, but the rich parts of town mitigate against those teachers in the poor parts of town and make it hard to get that prop plane off the ground. And that's not the only problem. Income inequality is not the only problem. If I could quote your friend El-Mekki when he says that I want to make sure I get this right. The most pressing issue in education today is the same as it's always been. It's the racism that fuels all the inequality. And in Atlanta, there's nothing more obvious than that geographic inequality is fueled by past and present racism. So,
I have a question about it, because if we're just talking about the measurements of things, what we call proficiency is a very low bar. So when we say that kids are not proficient, their test scores on certain tests have fallen below proficiency, the mark of proficiency that they are falling below is actually a very low bar. It's not mastery, it's not competence, it's actually just basically proficient, which in different states honestly means different things too. It means, like a proficiency in one state is different than proficiency in another state.
Yeah.
The reason I bring that up is because this dynamic of the kids are poor, they have parents that are economically stressed out, they have things going on in their lives and trauma, it becomes part of a formula. You say that, and then therefore they have low test scores and they can't hardly be imagined to learn, enough to get to this minimal level of proficiency. There's a lot that goes in between those two poles, like you're poor and you're Black and you live in an area where your mom works really hard. You may not have a dad in the house, and maybe you do. Even if you do, both of your parents are stressed economically and whatnot, and you can't possibly be taught to do better than what we're doing right now. So if a district has 15% proficiency or 20% proficiency, that number is not seen in terms of what is going into teaching them or how they're being taught or the type of schools they're going to. It's just purely a function of tell me who they are, where they come from, and I'll tell you why that number is that number. That's the essentialism part of this to me, is you have very poor kids in this world who have very traumatic villages that they live in who are becoming proficient. So that's the part for me where it becomes hard to balance the two. Like the reality, you don't want to dismiss the fact that kids have trouble and that income equality is driving a lot of it, and that being born without the basics that you need in life is a hurdle. It's a challenge that other people don't have. But you have to balance that with the idea too that you have a nation of educators and a nation of schools that will take that and run with it, to explain all of their failures, like their professional failures.
Yeah, and that is why that New York Times article bugged you so much, and it should, because to go back to your two polls, I think the poll of when you live in a stressed out economic circumstance, that creates stressors that make schooling hard. There's just no two ways around it. And we could swap stories about like who's housing insecure, how many teenagers are working jobs to help pay the rent. Mom and dad both have jobs or both have 2 jobs, and teenagers are staying home from school so they can care for younger siblings. All that doesn't go on in wealthier zip codes. But where we fail, and we do fail, is we walk into a school district or a host of school districts or a city or a host of cities, and we slice those data up and we go, well, these kids are educable and these kids aren't educable, right? And that's terrible. And that is the danger. And in between those two poles, we have to fix the situation, because we can't go.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think is happening when you find cases where Black middle class students are doing worse than white poor students?
I hate to
they have 2 parents, college educated, Black kids doing well, It came up in a show last night, 50% of Black kids are in the suburbs now. Like, we
Yeah.
think of it as an urban problem, but half of our kids now are in the suburbs, and we're
Hmm.
not all poor. And,
Yeah. Yeah.
and what we notice is even when our kids are that 50% that are now living in the better circumstances aren't finding it to be the Valhalla either. It's not the heaven of education that we thought it was. And in many cases, they're doing worse than poorer white kids.
So I think the big answer to that is racism, right? To drill into that a little bit, I mean, obviously, is I think that there are just those teachers out in the suburbs aren't ready to teach Black children, and I say that as somebody, and we could talk more about this if you'd like, but it's all over my writing, as somebody that walked into my first job 14 years ago not ready to teach Black children, because I grew up very typically white, meaning I have a white family, and I went to a white church, and I went to mostly white schools. I lived in a white neighborhood. When there were Black children in my school, they were in different rooms, all that. Most teachers are raised that way. And so we get in the suburbs, and these, we're used to teaching white kids. I've never taught in the suburbs, but I can imagine a white teacher in the suburbs is used to teaching white children, and Black children come in and they don't know what to do, and they act out in implicitly or explicitly racist ways. So that's, Claude Steele with the stereotype threat, Whistling Vivaldi. You read that?
Mm-hmm.
It's an older book now. So he talks a lot about this, about Black children moving to a middle-class school doesn't fix the problem, because the racism still haunts them. And that's not even always the fault of the individual teacher. It's just the fault of the structure that puts undue burden on the Black child than it does on the white child. So
if you think that a teacher shows up to a school ready to teach, and they've really absorbed this idea, this notion that income inequality drives racism, and racism drives the conditions that kids have in life, do you think that they actually ever think, though, that they're a part of that system by bringing those beliefs to a school district and into a classroom?
no, so some do. I want to just clarify that I think racism drives income inequality. So that's, behind income inequality is racism. Behind income inequality is the failure of the market, and behind the failure of the market is 400 years of slavery and sharecropping and Jim Crow and a whole host of other BS that causes income inequality, not just for Black people, but for white people too.
Mm-hmm.
But just to dial back to your question, I think that's the hard thing, is that teachers, and we're seeing this, it's all over Twitter, Facebook, Instagram right now, with everything that's going on in the country, and we'd be neglect if we didn't loop into that. So I think teachers are just like most humans, but definitely most white people, that a lot of white people, let's say, they're well-meaning.
I was about to say, for anybody listening or watching, this is Jay saying that. So when you fill up my inbox with all the, well, Chris, you are racist stuff, I'm going to say, Jay said that. Not that I care, honestly, to be real with you, but just in case anybody listening, this is Jay's point of view.
You're very comfortable with teachers. You're very comfortable with your inbox being filled up, I know. I think
listen, this is the way I see it, that I think colors my attitude. So I could read this. Anybody could have read these quotes that we're talking about right now and taken away many different things than what I took away from it, because it just hit me like the way that I've already think. It hit me in a specific way. But I believe that we can talk all we want about the kids, their circumstances, their parents, the situation that they're in, their condition, the condition of the child being something that conditions their education. And the problem that I'm going to have with that is that we have a nation we got 3 million college-educated people of a certain class going into classrooms every day with kids of a different class who want to one day have the same credentials but won't get there if the people teaching them are so intoxicated with their middle-class ideas and beliefs that they don't even know that those beliefs are like oxygen in their head. They just feel so right. Like, what I'm seeing is the experience, and what teachers will tell me, those college-educated, mostly white, mostly women, middle-class people who are teaching our kids on a daily basis, and, oh, by the way, the Black ones too, and others, there's very much a class issue here. What they will say is, Chris, you don't see what I see. You don't work in what I work, and that means that you're going to be missing a lot. which I don't discount, but let me say this. A police officer will say the same thing to me. You don't see what I see every day. These people are criminals. A judge will say the same thing to me. You don't see as many cases brought before you as I do. I see the worst of the worst, and you don't see that. Every authoritative position has a bit of occupational narcissism in it, where they don't see their own blind spots. They see what I don't know as a civilian and as a layperson. Chris, you don't know X, but they don't see what I see, which is, yeah, but you've also misdiagnosed my kid multiple times. You've told me that my kid has problems he doesn't have. You shared your analysis with me at times, and I've known for a fact you don't know my kid based upon what you've said to me. That's my problem when we have these conversations is we can't fix what's wrong with teaching, teacher preparation, teacher evaluation, teacher supports, teaching and learning, pedagogy, systems. We can't fix any of it if we put 90% of our emphasis on what's wrong with the kid and their communities and their families and their parents and the economy and the fact that we're not a socialist economy yet. If we have to wait for racism to be solved or socialism to come into place before we can expect teachers to know how to teach reading to kids that, aren't white and have the benefit of, white skin and two parents that are college educated, then we're over. Why do we even invest in schools and teachers? Why don't we just take all the money and, give it to the parents and say, here's an iPad, have at her. Here's your $200K that we're going to spend on your education because obviously you're poor, so we can't do much for you. Okay, that's an absurd place to take it, but
no, not at all. Because you're taken to the same place that person on Twitter took the New York Times. It's like, well, okay, we can't fix income inequality, so throw up our hands. And I don't want to be anybody be watching this and be misconstrued to think that I'm like, oh, we gotta fix racism or it's all over with. Like that's like we've again this past weekend has shown like fixing quote unquote racism is a difficult concept, right? But what we can do is we can retrain either slowly or quickly these white teachers. And some of those numbers, and you know the numbers, but something like 800,000 white teachers in America that are teaching mostly brown children right now, Black and brown children. That's a staggering number of people that are damaging to Black and brown children if they're not coming in the right place. And can we fix racism in the marketplace? Like that's not my job. That's way over my pay grade. But do I know something about white teachers and classrooms full of Black and brown children? And if you know anything about Atlanta or civil rights history, Benjamin Elijah Mays was president of Morehouse for a long time. He was Martin Luther King's mentor. He gave the eulogy at his funeral. My school is all Black. There is 2% Hispanic students. I've taught 2 white children in 14 years. Like it is a all Black part of town. It is an all Black school almost entirely. And I walked into that place never having been in a room full of Black people before. I'd never been the only white person in a room. I was not ready for this. And yet somehow I fuddled my way to being an okay teacher, I think. I have some pedigrees I could trot out if you want. But I think that possibility is there for other white teachers. I believe we can retrain some white teachers who aren't ready. And I wasn't racist. I'd never carried a flag. I'd never worn a hood. I'd never said the N-word. Like those aren't things that were part of my past. I was just normal middle-class white, which means I was completely oblivious to everything. And
you don't think that's racism?
Oh, absolutely. It is. It's the kind of racism that and that's to get back to something I was going to say a minute ago. It's the kind of racism that I think most white people feel, even the ones that are hashtagging Black Lives Matter right now, or they're blacking out their Instagram feeds yesterday. Like they're on the nominal side of anti-racism. They're on the nominal side of Black and brown people, but inside they've been trained of a lifetime of actual racism, and they need to unlearn that. We need to. I'm still unlearning. Let me say that.
For anybody watching or listening, I do want to say this. Of course, I look at the research that says that when Black students have Black teachers, something different happens in their trajectory. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have research that says that. We have research that says just one Black teacher makes a difference, and 2 makes an even bigger, an outsized difference, which tells me that if we had more black teachers, there would even be a bigger outsized difference. Again, the way that I look at research and things like these, we can't allow them to become truisms of themselves, though, because you're in Atlanta. And I just want to share this with folks. I wrote something about Atlanta's cheating scandal years ago called No Bougie Breaks for the Poor, which basically said that the middle class black teachers of Atlanta had an opinion about the poor black kids that they were teaching that wasn't significantly different than what we call racism when it's white teachers. And in this story, if people go back and look at Atlanta's cheating scandal, it was a black education scandal. It was class warfare. It was middle class black people and poor black people involved in a skirmish in classrooms that resulted in poor black people being the ones who got hurt. And it wasn't a whole staff of white teachers that were doing it, because when you look at the court case and you see all the PhDs, the black PhDs trotting themselves in, testifying, I would challenge anybody to go back and look at that tape and see what the black educators were saying in that courtroom. They were saying things like, I can't admit to what I did because it'll ruin my future career chances with my PhD. And they had black luminaries coming in supporting them. No one was in that courtroom supporting the black children who had lost. A study done of those children in Atlanta says that the disproportionate impact was on black students. And 75% of the students are black. 98% are identified as having the largest number of erasures on their answers, meaning they were the ones who got cheated the most when the cheating scandal happened. One of the black teachers who I created a sub headline out of was a teacher who said she went to one of the other teachers and said, I had to give your students the answers to the test because they dumb as hell. There's one teacher talking to another teacher. They're both black. The students are black. The teachers teaching have college educations, which is only a small percentage of black people. So that tells you that there's a class problem here, right? I want to slide that in here just to say that anybody listening, don't take this to the nth degree that we can let any group of teachers off the hook for the way that poor black kids are thought of and seen and cheated in American public schools. Now, I'm not expecting you to jump in on that because you're still teaching in Atlanta and it could be a problem for you. But
that's the two things you're talking about are, one, the cheating scandal, which is Atlanta's legacy forever at this point.
As it should
should be. It should be. Yes, they should be studying us in. I know you're not a big fan of PhDs, but they should be studying us in PhD programs for years and years. But also, what you're saying is interesting. I'm not just so I'm. Atlanta schools are they're kind of anomalous around the country because Atlanta City schools are mostly black staff, just like you said. There's 100 teachers in my building probably, and there were 3 white teachers this year. A couple Hispanic, Latinx, a couple Asian, and that's it. So 90 black teachers probably. And that's true around the whole district. We're a magnet for the black middle class and upper class too. I mean, so we have a lot of black teachers. And so you can't, and I'm not, I don't want to speak too much about this because we're just talking live, and I would want to make sure I said this very carefully, but obviously black people can have problems in the classroom too, to deal with systemic racism and how they think about children and each other. So that's probably all I want to say about that. If you want to lead the conversation a little more, you can.
Well, no, I think it's important just to point out that there's also a class problem. And I think anybody of any color needs to be as honest about pointing out class in education as they do about race. Because, it's easy and convenient for white teachers to fall on the sword of, oh, I'm a white teacher, I might be racist, here's my mea culpa, and to have certain other teachers not be part of that discussion. But at the end of the day, I do see classrooms as political. I see schools as political. And in some ways, I do see it as a war of the educated and the undereducated, and the middle class and the working and lower classes. That's at issue in schools. That's a battle. And
to get back to your what's the metaphor that gets us off the ground? What's the metaphor that beats gravity? And that the market doesn't have a lot of motivation to beat gravity for large portions of lower class kids, whether they're black or white or whatever. And that's, again, taking the conversation in a different direction maybe, but it is, class does matter. And we have set up a system where these large, you talk about this all the time on 8 Black Hands, this large group of failing schools, they're cash cows for the people that run them, the people that work there. Not that I'm getting rich teaching, but I do get paid, right? And there's a lot of people, there's so many people in the district, in the building, that don't teach and work in offices and give presentations, and the curriculum companies and the book companies and now the technology companies, they're going to make a billion dollars off of us in the next 5 years as they peddle all this online learning stuff to us. But they don't have any real motive to get children out of their low test scores, because then they wouldn't be able to sell us stuff anymore. So that's
Well, say more about that. Why wouldn't they? I mean, why would they particularly have an interest, though? Why would they care whether their test scores are low or high? They still sell you tests. I mean, tests are one way. For white people, tests are a way to prove that their kids are worthy of Harvard.
Yeah.
So there's always going to be a need to prove that you're worthy of Harvard, or that you're worthy of being better than the others, or that you have an SAT score that puts you in whatever percentile. It's not all. The market motive for selling the test is, it could be for anything. It's kind of neutral to me. It doesn't have to all be based on failing kids, I think. Am I missing? What am I missing there?
Well, I guess what I'm thinking about is in my 14 years teaching, and in case you're wondering, I am 44, so I came to teaching a little late. Just if you were looking at me thinking, that guy looks too old to be in his 30s.
Anybody who says 44 and says too old will never be welcome on my show. I just want you to know that, anybody watching.
Just in case somebody did the math, it was like 22 plus 14. He's not 36. I am not 36. But in my 14 years teaching, we've probably been through, I made a list at one point, I don't have it handy, is probably 8 different all-inclusive learning platforms that were all online. And every year we buy a new one and we train on it, and I lose a day of teaching to go get trained on it. And then the next year that platform is gone and it is replaced by a different platform that I go get trained on, and we all use for 6 months, and then that gets dropped. And that's a district bureaucracy problem, but it is also, there is a huge motive for those all-in-one learning platforms to keep changing, keep selling, they don't really honestly care whether we get better or not. If we got better, we wouldn't need them. I guarantee you, very, very test score successful districts aren't using these all-in-one learning platforms. Their kids are in classrooms and they might be doing some supplemental online, but they're not just sticking their kids in front of a computer and telling them, "Oh, go learn algebra because you failed it last year, and then you can learn algebra, and then you can be in the geometry class." And so anyway, I agree with you that the test could be neutral in and of itself, but I think the apparatus that builds up around the test is not neutral. I think it is very much bent on preying on the low scoring kids, and those kids tend to be lower income also.
Say more about that. How is it preying on the low income kids?
Well, first off, I will say this about tests, is that there's always been a bee in my bonnet, is that tests are bell curved, right? So the SAT, I don't know if I can do this with the computer. The SAT's got it. It's I'm going backwards and stuff. The SAT's got its bell shaped curve, and what the reason the cheating scandal came about is because the district pitted all of us against each other, right? And I came in very late to this game. It was going on before I got there, and got uncovered pretty quick after I got there. And I was at high school. It was not really a high school phenomenon, but it pitted all the elementary schools against each other, and they got bonuses based on their test scores. And not only that, they got lauded in emails and media. And we had this weird kind of Hitler pep rally every year where we'd all go to the Civic Center in Atlanta, right near the Dome, and the schools that did really well on their test scores would sit up front and get all these privileges, like first class on a plane, and those of us that did bad on our test scores would sit in the back, and we would watch them get lauded. It was a very Hunger Games-y strange thing. But my point is that the tests do that too. They're pitting us against each other because it's actually not possible on a normed test. This may be too wonky, but it's actually not possible on a normed test for everybody to move up at once. Because if everybody moves up at once, the mean just moves, and we're still going to have 50% of the kids below the mean, and they're still going to be called failing because they're below the mean. And so it's possible for individual schools and students and teachers and systems to move up. But if magically all of the children that were below 50% scored twice as good next year, but everybody else scores good too, the whole thing just shifts and nobody would know. Does that make sense? And that's what I mean by this. The test is.
Let's take a look at this, because you're a math teacher, and some of this I think gets confusing.
Yeah.
For
I'm sorry.
folks. But no. Actually, it's a good part of the conversation, because if we are as a community going to have conversations about what our kids are learning and how they're being measured and all that, we should know the instruments that we're talking about. You're talking about the SAT as an instrument. It has a grading curve as part of it. Here's this thing.
But I'm also talking, just to be clear, I'm also talking about specifically in Georgia, our state tests. And to me, they used to be called EOCTs. Now they're called milestones, but they're very similar around the country, but they're normed just like the SAT, so that my individual students can do better. But if all the individual students do better, the norm just moves and my kids would still be failing, if that makes sense. So anyway, state tests too, but.
So there's a couple of things about that. So first of all, the one thing I'll say, in studying social networks years ago, we needed an analogy, and we were working with a doctor who was both a medical doctor and someone who studied social networks. And she said it takes a lot of blood samples to create a normative range, right?
Okay.
So a normative range is not problematic, right? Like if you're looking at hypertension or disease or whatnot, finding out where people fall within a normative range, first of all, requires a lot of blood samples, like an extraordinary number of blood samples to find out what that range is, which means you have to test people. And then once you find out what that range is, it gives you clues when people fall outside of that range, and it might be a problem when they do, like a health problem, like an issue, like it might kill you to fall outside of that range. It's not saying that, that range is somehow just magical, whatever. It's just saying you better pay attention if you fall outside of it, right? Because it could hurt you. This is saying that the SAT is similar in a way. It's basically saying that the bell curve is a misconception about the SAT. I don't know why, because I'm not a psychometrician, and reading a lot of this gets really interesting to me because it goes a few different ways. But how would it hurt if, say, every school in Atlanta public schools all of a sudden did grow above proficiency and did well? Every single school in the district all of a sudden did well, and the kids were all proficient. How would that be a problem? So
on a national test, it wouldn't, because like you're saying, there's a large enough sample size that it would be as much noise as anything else, and we would celebrate and have moved up a big chunk, and somebody else, a whole bunch of people would have slipped down a little bit maybe to make that happen, but they wouldn't notice, and we'd be excited. On a state test, though, it would be problematic to have one of the bigger districts in the state, the size of Georgia. I don't know about like the size of New York, or let's just take a New York, New York city district. If all their students magically performed above proficiency, it would require mathematically all the upstate kids to slide down, because that's how the test works. That's how bell curves work. And was it blood pressure you just said? The blood pressure analogy is
blood samples. Yeah. So to find
samples
out many different diseases, it requires you to take an extraordinary number of blood samples. And then after that, you create a normative range for different diseases, different things, could be used for that same sampling.
So here's an example I liked. I think this might help the the people that don't have the bell curve right in their head when I'm talking, which is most of America, because it's boring. Is when you and I were kids, and I'm just making an assumption that you're, I'm not going to say an age, but you're about my age-ish.
I'm older than you, but keep going, man.
When you and I were kids, when we were in high school, like getting a perfect 1600, getting an 800 on the SAT was a big deal. It was, you got your name.
It was almost
Yes,
impossible.
right.
Yeah,
You got
yeah,
your name in the paper. Like if it
yeah,
had, I went to high school in Augusta. You would have been in the paper in Augusta
yeah.
and that's not a tiny city. Nowadays, that happens all the time. And here's why: because when you and I were in high school, most children that were not succeeding in high school didn't take the SAT, and so the bell curve was kind of squished in. And now we're in a situation where we at our school last year in Atlanta, we just made everyone take the SAT, whether that kid was going to college, whether that kid was even going to graduate from high school. We made him take the SAT. And what it does is it creates a whole lot of low scores when you're asking a child who's not planning on graduating to take the SAT. They probably aren't going to do their best because they're not going to try all that much. It creates a whole lot of low scores. And to have a whole lot of low scores, it necessitates a pushing up of the high scores. So a kid that might have gotten a 770 20 years ago gets an 800 now because he's been pushed up by those low kids on the other side, if that makes sense.
It doesn't.
Well,
let me tell you why.
Let's switch then.
It doesn't make sense just in this way. No, I think it's important though, because one, for a period of time, that will be true. So when you have a large population that doesn't participate in the test and then they come in, definitely year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, however many years it takes, there is a lowering of everything. The floor drops out because you're now including a large number of kids that never participated before, right? So in Florida, for instance, when Jeb Bush first came in Florida, the number of Black and Latino students that took the AP test was very low. One of the reforms that they had was in keeping with what many states did was say, we're going to make way more of them take the AP test. And a metric became, we've got this percentage of Black kids now taking the AP test, which became a big deal, taking it. No one paid attention to they were failing it, though, right, in big numbers. But in Florida, they had a 300% increase in the number of Black and brown students passing the AP test, right? So that by itself means that you can't have kids hit a mark that they're not even in the game for, right? So once you put them in the game for it, they're still going to fail. Lots of them may fail, but eventually you're going to start seeing progress over time. It took years for that to kick in for Florida, right? For that. But in the first years, absolutely, people could have said, oh my God, look how the scores have tanked now that you have all these other kids taking it and whatnot. But the SAT, I do think that the game got better for the upper echelon. They started doing, they were becoming more competitive. The white kid who was doing really well before suddenly was breaking barriers that they hadn't broken for themselves before. But let's make no bones about it. It's still not like a nation of people getting a 1600, right?
No, but it's
still uber competitive kids, you know.
Here's another example. Let's just say that I have no idea the numbers, but let's say, 500,000, let's say 1 million, just because it's an easy number. That's not true, but 1 million kids took the SAT last year. Let's say that. All right. If the 500,000 kids who weren't going to be successful, who were going to be below average, if they magically walked out ahead of time or had their scores absolved, the curve would have had to renorm, and kids that would have been on the higher end would all of a sudden be in the middle end, and kids that would have been in the middle are all of a sudden going to be on the lower end, and they might not even know that it happened. Now, that example is fantastical because they would abolish the test. My point is that an SAT, a test that's normed like that, needs a large quantity of failing students in order to have a large quantity of successful students. That's the way the test works. And there's small, somebody on your, I saw a comment down here a minute ago that said something about a couple of districts that have high proficiency scores. And she asked, why is that a problem? Of course it's not a problem. Of course we should want that. My point is just that and maybe I'll get added to death on this, but like the testing companies, the testing companies do not have a motive to make low performing students higher performing. It's not neutral, because their model is based on having a churn of, for lack of a better word, I'm just gonna say chum that the sharks can eat at the bottom. And that chum creates a scaffolding that the higher students can build upon. And that's just
so. Let's
math.
just say next year, the NAEP and every state test all of a sudden next year shows that Black and brown students, Asian students, white students, students with disability, low income, all of a sudden were proficient. That the test scores showed that next year. How would that be a problem for the test makers? If every kid was hitting the same bar, like you weren't hitting the same level of proficiency, but you all went at least got to proficiency level, how would that be a problem for Pearson?
So here's where we're out over my skis, is that I don't know how all the state tests work. I know how the SAT works, ACT, and I know kind of from a black box point of view how our state tests work in Georgia. So I see again someone's comment down here, like she's saying something about this is not a bell curve, and like I'm sure there are tests that don't do what I'm talking about. So I'm not. Again, I'm just out over my skis in terms of talking about every test. So your specific example in a specific district might be real, and of course, if we actually just pegged a proficiency thing, a point on the test, and everybody reached it, that would be amazing, and that would, in theory, be possible on any given test. So I'm not saying that I can't say that there are probably tests that do that, that are doing this properly, and they are neutral, and they're just setting a bar, and if you clear that bar, like, it's all golden. I am arguing that the SAT is not one of them, and the ACT is not one of them, and the Georgia high school state tests are not them either.
So, thinking about this in terms of Black advocacy around education, like what Black people should be advocating for and how they should be thinking of these issues when they come to advocate for Black students. I want to share something from the UNCF. So this is UNCF's K-12 disparity facts and statistics. The statistic one is that African American students are less likely than white students to have access to college-ready courses in school. That's not a function of capitalism versus socialism. That is a function of Black kids not having access to college-ready courses in schools, which is determined by school boards and superintendents and teachers and principals in collaboration with each other that create rules and policies and pathways. Right. So that's something that Black advocacy in education should be paying attention to. Even when students do have access to honors and advanced placement courses, they're vastly underrepresented in those courses. Again, not something that's a function of capitalism, the market, inequality, any of that. It's a function of policies and procedures and practices put together by politicians and superintendents and teachers.
Well, it's a function. It's a function of the racism behind all that. Back to El Meki's quote, like, the racism fuels all that other stuff that fuels what you're saying.
So, okay, let's take that then. If it's a function of racism and the people who are making the determination are educators, politicians, superintendents, and school boards, then that must necessitate that the people who run the apparatus of education are the racists that we're talking about, because they're the ones that are making the processes, the practices, the pedagogy, and all of that together. So again, it's artful for them to point toward Pearson and billionaires and external forces and factors to keep us off of the trail, that when it really comes down to the things that we're advocating around for the success of Black children, those things actually are systemic within the system itself, and they're not external to the system. The actors and the players are school boards, superintendents, teachers unions, classroom teachers, principals, the people who run the apparatus locally. They can say that a lot of the external stuff and higher up laws and state laws and whatever are pushing them to do certain things. But no, when you're talking about something so basic and simple about whether or not kids have access to college-ready courses, that is a function of decisions that people make, like locally. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I'm a public school teacher. My kids go to public school, our zone public school. And I would be the first to tell you, if you have the chance to get out of your zone public school for something that makes more sense for your family, whether that's progressive charter, traditional charter, homeschooling, private school, whatever, I mean, like, you should, because what you're saying is true. The whole system is rotten, and there's good bright spots laced everywhere, but getting out might be the best way to do it.
Well, what's important to me is it's not just thinking about choice. It's the thing about when we're going to have technical discussions about advocacy and what we should push for or not push for. I would hope that my people don't get off the trail of what they're thinking about. So statistic number 5 In fact, 61% of ACT tested Black students in 2015. 2015's high school graduating class met none of the 4 ACT college readiness benchmarks, nearly twice the 31% for all students. That, again, that's not to me a function of anything other than the fact that 61% of ACT tested Black students weren't prepared for the 4 categories that create the readiness benchmark.
Yeah,
and they could have been. That's the additional point that I want to put here is they could have been. It's not because of, in my mind, it's not because of external factors that created this, because next year it could go up to 70%, or it could go down to 50% based upon policies and practices and what people do in school districts, decisions that they make. Next year, this says 61% of them didn't meet this metric, and next year that could be better or it could be worse, but it is going to depend on decisions people make. It's going to be hard for them to make those decisions if they constantly have the whipping boy of Marxist ideology and external factors and corporations and multinational corporations and billionaires and profit motive and all that stuff as an intoxicant that prevents them from thinking clearly about what superintendents, school boards, teachers unions, teachers, educators, principals, classrooms, what happens there. If they're so intoxicated with their Marxist ideology, it's going to be hard for them to do the practical things we need for them to do for Black students. That's my opinion. But how does that sit? You're an educator, you're in a classroom, you're of goodwill. You've obviously put yourself towards the betterment of kids and the improvement of education. So when I say something like that, how do you receive that? How does that land in your ears?
So first a metaphor, because I think you're right. I think I'm going to use your word intoxicated, getting intoxicated by Marx and markets, or Foucault would be another great one. Getting wrapped up into that would be like trying to paint a painting from a distance. Yeah, you can see the whole picture, but you're not going to get any work done from back there. To paint a painting, you got to move up and get so close. We're talking about a large painting here. You got to get so close that you can't see the whole thing, but you can see where your zone, your lane, if you want to use a football word. And so what's helpful for me about the theory, Chris, is that as a young teacher, I was not a young man. Well, I was young, actually. I didn't know it. But as a young teacher, I absorbed so much, and young teachers all around America are going to resonate with this. I absorbed so much blame for everything, so much just crap heaped on us from above, from our principals, our admins, the system, but the media, the news, just this constant stream of, if teachers would just do better. And we were thick into No Child Left Behind. Bush was still president. And it was just like, if you had higher expectations, your kids would be doing better. This is your fault. And I do think that we've got to have high expectations. I do think that a teacher without high expectations is going to fail. But I also think that high expectations, as just kind of like proxy for everything we're talking about, isn't enough to beat all these other forces. And you got to have an idea on the force. You got to have a big picture. You don't have to read Marx to know that the school systems are kind of a failing market. You don't have to read Foucault to know that the school systems are based on power and control in a way that's bad for a teacher.
Do you actually think, though, that public schools are a market? Like in the classical definition of what a market is?
No, they're a failed market. Yeah.
Yeah, because they're the worst example of a market if they are like a market. Yeah.
No, and that's what they're like healthcare. They're a captured market. And that you say this number all the time. I don't know the exact number, but what's the money value of a Black child walking into a public school? Mm-hmm. You say it over their lifetime. It's like
I often say that you have $1 million kid. If you have a Black kid, you have $1 million kid, and everybody is trying to get a part of the money that comes with them for any service that they receive throughout their lives.
And Chris, most of that money is not going to teachers. And this isn't me complaining about pay. I get paid fine. I'm thrilled. This is just me saying the money is getting drained away by the system. And that's why to talk about markets, I think, is important. That's where to talk about a failed marketplace. that child is bringing $1 million with them, and the failed market is siphoning that off and not leaving them with anything. That's your point, is that $1 million is being wasted and lining the pockets of someone else. But back to the picture and the big picture. I'm interested in white teachers because I'm white, and I think white teachers have, unfortunately, an oversized role to play right now. We do need more black teachers. You said something a couple of weeks ago that was so interesting to me, and I've quoted it to like 12 people since then. You said something like, I'm not going to get your quote right, but you said something like, well, I don't blame a black or brown child for not wanting to go into education because the school was such a miserable place for them. Why would they want to go back into it? And I don't remember exactly how you put it, but you said something like that. And that really, really hit me. But that's not my lane, right? My lane is white teachers. So when I get up close to that painting and look at, well, what can I do? I think I can talk to white teachers. I think I can speak to them. That's what my writing and my work's about. Not because it's the most important thing. It's my lane. Mm-hmm. I think everybody needs a lane. You have a much bigger lane than most of us.
Mm-hmm. I don't really. But I have my kids' lane. Like I have as somebody who doesn't feel like I have nostalgia about my schools, my public schooling education.
You do or don't?
I don't. Like, when I hear people talk so lovingly and so nostalgic about how they had this teacher that changed their life, and oh my God, like school was so awesome for me or whatever. That's not my life, actually. So I became a dad at 22, having really negative attitudes and a lot of educational trauma, and just kind of like discounting the whole system. But I couldn't do that once I became a dad.
Yeah.
And I really, like, what people had told me my whole life is, once you get an education, no one can take it away from you. So when I became a dad, I kind of had that resonant in my head. That was my tape of like, if I could do anything for my kid, can't give them the world and moon and the stars and all the like fancy stuff that other people are giving their kids, but I definitely can like fight this system like hell to make sure that this kid goes to college, comes out the other end, and in his 20s lives better than I did, in all my life. And that's exactly what happened. It worked. I think but that was all like the fuel of that story that made it happen was my cynicism and disbelief in the system, and the idea that we were going to have to get an education in spite of it, and all the people in it who loved it so much and thought that, everything they did was awesome. Everything is awesome. Everything is awesome. When I think about it now, though, we're all in some capacity in public debate. We're all in some capacity like in educational commentary, and there's a national narrative and a debate that actually ends up being policy at some point. So all these discussions, that happens, right?
I was going to say there's 3 million teachers and any number of million of parents, and then the rest of us pay taxes on property. The number of people that don't have an investment in their schools is really low.
But for me, like, it becomes a thing about myth slaying, because there are a lot of things that we take for granted that become placeholders for critical thought. And they're just like, you insert kind of stereotype here about how we should think about poverty, how we should think about teacher pay, how we should think about testing, how we should think about economics. And they're not even like thoughts anymore. They're just like placeholders for actually rational thought. So the idea that the teachers don't get rich off of that $700 billion, the greatest percentage of that money, the biggest investment that Americans make, taxpayers make in public education, is in the salaries of teachers. Those teacher salaries have doubled. They have doubled while the percentage of the numbers of students has halved over time. So we have like increased personnel and school personnel. And though an individual teacher may not be making all of the money, collectively, when you put them in a collective bargaining unit, that has become very wealthy over time. And when you try and separate a teacher from their job, they make a claim in court that says that job is property. And if you're talking about many white teachers, then you're calling it a teaching job, a public teaching job, white property. And the main kind of recipient for that job now is kids of color and kids of the poor, right? So we have to like be critical in the way that we accept all of these narratives around. And the idea that a middle-class white person who gets something that few Americans get, which is a college degree in education, sometimes an advanced one, is the victim. because they're being complained about or because they don't like the messages that they're receiving is the most precious, delicate, snowflakey occupational thing. To me, it's not a function of that person being a bad person.
Well,
It's a
no,
function
hold
that
on.
maybe they shouldn't be teaching, right? Not in urban schools, maybe, you know.
Let me say this because I'm worried the time's going to run out. And
Go ahead.
Yeah,
and we'll take an extra 5 if we need to, man. I will give you, the floor is yours. Do this.
Because let's be real clear. Teaching is like, even if you're bad at it, it's a really like pretty easy profession. You have a good schedule, you have a good time, you do get the summer, you're not going to get rich, but you also could work another job if you wanted to during your extra time. Like, you could be a bad teacher or even a medium teacher, and it's a great job. You might not be good at it, but this is not for those snowflakes out there that are complaining. I am saying this though. I don't know the number offhand, but maybe you do. How many teachers we lose within 5 years of first employment? How many leave teaching altogether and they go into admin, they go into education, like one of the para organizations, they quit education altogether? It's astronomical. It's an astronomical figure of the number of teachers that get in and get out. And we're not even, I had a Twitter thread going the other day with a bunch of teachers. Like, nobody even thinks they're a good teacher until year 7 or so. And was I a good teacher at year 3? I was okay. But like, am I a better teacher now? Yeah. So like, the fact that we lose so many teachers by year 5, I think is a result. And this is where I want to like push back against that snowflake comment of you are in a job that if you care about it and work hard is tough. It's tough to educate children. You're being paid. It's a job. You took it. But to have the outside forces, and especially if those forces are in your building, telling you what a crummy job you're doing, not based on test scores, but just based on this oppression of the public school teacher. I do think that leads to a lot of teachers leaving before they even get their feet from under them. It's like Bambi trying to learn to walk and just get shot before she can even step up. Or was Bambi a he? I don't know. But
now you're being sexist, Jay.
Yeah, I can't remember.
No, okay. So I love these discussions. Let's just, as thinking people, let's think about it critically, very critically.
Yeah.
I accept what you just said. I accept it as a reality. We're going to go a few minutes extra here. I accept what you just said as a reality. But let's look at let's provide an analog. Okay. So in California and in Illinois, the bar exam for people who want to be attorneys, aspiring attorneys, is like the pass rate is like 45%, right? Which means the vast majority of the people take the bar, and many of them take it several times and don't pass. So they don't become attorneys, which means that profession, before you get to being a practicing attorney, actually has weeded out the majority of people. So you don't have first-year attorneys not feeling like they can cut it and then quitting being attorneys, because the profession itself, as a profession, already did that for you ahead of time. In state after state after state after state, we are lowering the bar of the induction process of who can teach and who can be a teacher. The idea that many of them in their first 1, 2, 3, or 4 years would not be cutting it and would be leaving or being, succumbing to the pressure or feeling like it's too much is not a problem that doctors have and lawyers have and other professions have, because they take care of that way up front, way upstream. What we tend to do is we still allow the gate is wide to get into the classroom, right? If we narrowed that gate like Finland did and some other countries did, we might have better rates of retention and people staying in it, because they would have done the tough stuff ahead of time and would have self-selected or been selected by the profession outward. That's one thing.
Yeah, but you just named...
Statistically, I will say this too. I'll just add this one last piece. The government, when they researched this, found out that it was the teachers that had the highest SAT scores that were the most likely to leave, right?
Yeah.
So the ones that actually stayed were the ones with the lower opportunities, let's just say, because maybe they didn't have as many pathways out as others have. And what does that tell us over time if that's who stays and the brightest teachers leave in that first 5 years?
So first off, you kind of subtweeted me there, but I have a really good SAT score. My GRE score is really awesome too. So anybody wants to know them, you can just message me. I'll let you know.
That was a joke. PhD too, right?
I do have a PhD. I didn't
Yeah.
want to say it
Okay.
because I
So
know.
yeah,
Okay.
you have a PhD, right? No, I'm not going to give you a hard time for having a PhD,
Okay.
but I'm going to say, what percentage of classroom teachers have a PhD?
Not as many as are in the education apparatus for sure. Like
That's true, by far.
you get your doctorate and you get
And
out
you're
of the
done.
classroom.
You become a superintendent and you get $400,000 a year
Or
for creating PowerPoints.
you become a master teacher or an instructional coach or a mentor, or there's so many jobs of people that used to be teachers and aren't principals and are doing some kind of like bureaucratic work. That's where your $1 million is going as a parent. It's going to those people. And I like your doctor and I like your medical and lawyer analogy. I say all the time, we've got to figure out a way to make teacher training more like medical training, because a doctor isn't in charge until after they've been out 5 or 6 years. They do all kinds of internships and they're paid a little bit for that. They don't get rich, but they go to a paid internship here and a paid internship here, and they learn how to be whatever it is they're being before they're cut loose in a full doctor. But they're paid for that along the way. Whereas teachers, we do 1 semester student teaching,
which
and
you
then
pay for, by the way, which
we pay for.
Like I have to pay you to work. Like,
Yeah,
it makes no sense to me.
and for every person that had a great experience, and I did, there are 20 people that had a terrible student teaching experience, not because the classroom was bad, because their mentor just wasn't invested in them. My mentor was very invested in me.
Yeah.
But the point, to go back to my complaint about your analogy, is you're talking about 2 very highly paid professions, right? Doctors and lawyers are willing to put up with all kinds of crap to get to that starting line, because they know once they hit the starting line, they're going to get paid. They're going to get an investment back, or they're going to get a return back on their investment that they put in. And
that's because they're going into a profession, though. That's because they're going into a profession. Teaching is an occupation in the United States. It's not a profession. It's an occupation right now. And if you wanted those type of rewards, you would have to make more stringent the gate to get in. Like the upward pricing of a doctor is based upon the limited number of seats to get in to become a doctor. Like it's going to require the top.
No.
That's my
the upward price.
So.
The upward pricing of a doctor is based on the amount of money injected into the system, and it's based on the fact that they need those doctors doing those services, and whatever I know we got plenty of money.
Yeah. So when Finland took a look at this and they shut down their teacher colleges, for instance, they made it harder to become a teacher, and they made the idea of who's going to become a teacher more like who would have become an engineer or a doctor or others.
Right.
They raised the pay to make that happen because they were making it more selective. So anything that gets less selective in the United States has less of a premium on it. In the world, actually, anything that has less of less selective nature to it. Finland, people talk about it as a model of like improving teaching and whatnot, but people fail to remember that they shut down their teacher colleges and made it very hard to become a teacher if you weren't at that level, like the level of a doctor engineer.
I don't know. This is what I take away from what you just said, because this is what I think would fix things instantly if they could whoever they is, had the will and the ability.
The magic they.
You cut the system bureaucracy by 50 to 70%. You double the number of teachers in the classroom and give everybody a premium raise so that we can be more selective in our process. And that would fix so many problems in education, because right now we have these overcrowded classrooms, and we have teachers that are not being paid a premium to do a job that you said it. They have a college degree. Anyone in the classroom already has a college degree. They have an out, right? And so we have overcrowded classrooms it's hard to teach, and we're not paying an incredible amount to do a tough job. And we could fix both of those things.
You're seeing Minneapolis burn right now, right? You're seeing Minneapolis as a bastion of liberal inequality that's burning right now, and things are on fire. We're taking it to our police union right now, but our teachers union here is full of good-willed people, white teachers, the majority of whom drive into Minneapolis every day from the suburbs, don't live here, and they drive in from some very suspiciously red counties, but maybe, hey, who knows, maybe they're the only liberals in those counties who are coming in to do a good job every day. The average the average comp for a teacher in Minneapolis fully loaded is $90K a year.
No, really?
Yeah, it is for 9 months work, actually, as a matter of fact. So I love this analogy around, what we pay is, because we're not some southern state that actually believes that, highly feminized occupations should be paid nothing. I'm sure many of those teachers would tell you that they still don't feel like they're particularly well paid, but let's just say, $90K is the fully loaded teacher.
Well, let me say this,
with the
I have
pension.
a
So
I have a PhD and 14 years of experience, and I don't make that much money. So that's just our average comp is way lower than that.
I want to point out that it's possible that with your average comp that you're doing better for Black and brown kids in your district than we are with our teachers, who are veterans, well-educated, nice people who are, I believe, compensated well enough to live a good life, a good American life. And our racial inequities, we're the number 2 worst place in the country to raise a Black family, but we're one of the number 1 best places for a white family to be raised. So when we talk about things like teacher comp and teacher professionalism and how we treat teachers and how they feel or whatnot, it hits differently in my ears because of where I live, because of how we live here versus we like to say stuff here like at least we're not Mississippi, and it turns out over the last few years Mississippi has cleaned our clock with Black kids, right?
Wow.
And part of that is because we think we're superior because we're so professionalized and all that. So actually, I only bring that story up though to say I'm not right. I'm not thinking that I'm right 100%. I see stuff across the country and whatnot, but we all have a perspective that's based in something that we've experienced and we've seen. I just given you a little insight into what I see and what I experience. Well enough paid teachers, generally kind of nice people. The majority of whom, we only have 4% Black teachers in the Twin Cities, for instance, and in the state, I think it's like only 1.2 or 2% Black teachers in the state. So,
what's the percent student?
So the students are 75% or 70% of color. And for instance, in Minneapolis Public Schools, schools, and they've gained more white kids over time, as a matter of fact. So it used to be, it was closer to 80% kids of color. Minneapolis itself, 80% of the people in Minneapolis don't have kids in the public schools. So it makes it hard for them. So in a white city with very, well-to-do, college-educated people that has a school system in the middle of it that's largely kids of color, it's hard for them to see very clearly that the problems are in the system, not in the kids. But I appreciate this. We should keep talking. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I would say there's a comment on there right now that is a whole nother, would be an awesome thing to talk about if we had time. It just switched for me. I can't remember. It was Alan somebody. It just left.
Yeah.
But he said, yeah. He said a good teacher gets paid the same as a lousy teacher. And that's not true for doctors and lawyers. And we all know that's true, right? Like awesome lawyers make a lot of money and awesome teachers make the same as the person next to them, basically. Yeah. And the incentive structure, not only that, the incentive structure is for a good teacher to get out of the classroom and go make more money working as a coach or a master teacher or a principal or they present software or books or whatever. The incentive structures are all goofed up for teaching in a way that they're not for doctors and lawyers. I just wanted to bring that up because Alan said it was a good point.
I think it's important just to say, like, when we talk about that group of teachers that leave, if I knew that I was good at my job and I was talented and I was working around people that were mediocre and I knew it for sure, and they were trying to say we're all in this together. Let's join this same organization called the union. Let's all get paid the same amount every year, year after year. A 5-year teacher is the same as a 7 or a first-year teacher or whatever. Like that kind of like washing out my talent, my skills, and my mediocrity. Of course, I would leave. Of course, all talented people would leave that. Talented people don't want to be lumped in with mediocrity, and we don't pay enough, I think, attention to that too. And I'll end on this. As harsh as people think I am when I talk about teachers, the fact of the matter is I'm 20 years now into this activism, and the majority of what I think and have to say comes from visits to schools and talks with educators. And no one in private is more straight up about bad teaching and teachers who shouldn't be teaching than the teachers in the same schools with them. And I know many educators who can take me to a school and show me everybody in that school who has no business teaching Black children. Right? And they wouldn't be called teacher bashing for doing it. They would but they will only tell you in private. They won't tell you publicly.
I don't think, I'd be shocked if there was a good teacher that listened to you speak. And you're teacher bashing because you're bashing bad teachers. I know you're not teacher bashing. You're bashing bad teachers, and we all do it, just like you said. And I'm not a bad teacher. I don't hear myself when you're talking. And to talk about perspective real quick, we don't even have union in Georgia. So y'all talk about union so much. And I know that's a part of the story in so many municipalities. We don't have that. So I'm lacking that perspective altogether.
Well, um, that could actually be another show around the difference between unionized and ununionized, and districts that have associations. So there's a difference between being
Yeah.
unionized, ununionized, or one of those states that still have associations that are equally as not equally, but or nearly as equally as involved in the policy process. Still can get things done without a union. Jay, I appreciate you coming on and doing this. I hope that you come back again. I hope that we find more to talk about. This broadcast for me every morning is about learning and debating and thinking critically, and it being a continuing dialogue. This isn't meant to be firing line. This isn't like crossfire
Oh,
or anything like that.
I'm just so excited to have gotten to talk to you, getting to talk to a smart guy about education for an hour and a half. I'm on summer break already, so
Wow.
Yeah, we finished before Memorial Day, so my brain's loving this. I'm gonna go read a bunch of articles and look at the stuff you pulled up. And anyway, this has been great. I would love to talk more. I feel like we left a lot of threads hanging, so
Well, come back.
I
Come
love
back.
it.
Let's do it again. And then in the meantime, if you think of anything else like that we should be reading in prep for the show, you had lots of interesting stuff out there too. I would encourage my listeners and viewers who I love for doing this every morning with us and adding and contributing and thinking and giving me thoughts afterwards about good shows. If you want to get in touch with Jay, his Twitter handle has been going across the bottom, and it's just at Jay Wamsted, and that's Wamsted. On Twitter, you can find him. Also, if you Google him, you're going to find him various articles that he has done in Sojourners that I thought were. You have a range. You've been in like the kind of Christian stuff
Yeah.
and the music stuff. Your music is really good. It's actually like really
Thank you.
like and I'm not just saying that because I'm a musician of sorts, not practicing at least, but a lot of times my friends send me a link to SoundCloud and look at these songs that I just did, and most of the time you have to be very polite and say, yeah, wow, that was really pretty good. No, but yours is legitimately really good, so I think you should go and find it on YouTube and listen.
I appreciate it. That's a good plug. Thank you.
Yeah.
And if you just real quick, if you're not on Twitter and you want to email me, it's just my last name at Gmail. So if you're mad at me,
is that what it
just
is?
Wamsted. Yep.
At Gmail.
Yep.
Damn,
So
you must have been an early adopter. So you got the.
Yeah. Actually, my people, it's an old Norwegian name. We're from Minnesota, like a long time ago.
I was about to say.
So
you better come home to your roots one day, man.
I've only been there once. It was very, very cold, even in the middle of summer in that lake. So we didn't go back.
Yeah, well, it keeps out the riffraff. That's what we say about Minnesota weather. There you go. Thank you again for coming. Thank you for everybody who commented today. I do read all of the comments before or during the show, and then after the show, I really do go through and dig into them, thinking about how we can have a better broadcast every day, better conversations. Send me ideas, thoughts for guests or topics, and I will respond. You can find me at Christopher@activist.com. I see it every day, so if you didn't catch it today, you'll catch it tomorrow or the day before. Thank you all for listening, and Jay, thanks again for being with us.
Thanks so much.